what we need to do is make sure that working class people do not in any way perceive immigration to be a threat. Because if we do have a capitalist system that allows employers to exploit people on low wages, then the greater the pool that those employers can draw from, the more they'll be able to exploit. They'll say, well, if you're willing to work for 3p, I'll employ that person, and that pushes wages down. However, if we strengthen unions, if we empower unions to actually make sure that people are not exploited, then the standard wage in the UK will be better, and the more people we get will not affect wages at all.
Order! Order! Order!
Hello and welcome to Not to Get Political, the podcast where we delve into the world of politics and hope to remain unscathed. First things first, we've changed location. Second of all, the government's a shit show and so is the country. As we speak, MPs are debating whether vulnerable people fleeing war and persecution should be sent to Rwanda as part of the Tories' latest attempt at performative cruelty to some of the most vulnerable people on the planet. A scheme that the Supreme Court has ruled was unlawful, however, the Tories have decided to push ahead with this legislation. To discuss this with me today is friend of the show, Femi. Femi, thank you so much for coming on again. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. It's lovely living in a country that is just falling to shit.
So let's sort of get into it. The Rwanda deal, what should people know about it?
So the idea is to basically put it beyond the ability of the courts to declare that Rwanda is an unsafe country for us to send asylum seekers to, which really goes beyond what the politicians should really be doing, because one of the most basic principles of democracy is the separation between the government, the legislature, the parliament that makes the laws, and the courts that then apply the laws. If you have the government essentially controlling the parliament and telling the parliament to decide what facts the Supreme Court should decide, they're controlling all three. Democracy's dying.
I mean, but this sets a very dangerous precedent, right? If the government if the government is saying we want to pass this law, and the courts are saying no, you can't do that because it's unlawful, and the government says, well, sod you, we're going to continue with this. This sets a very dangerous precedent because there are a lot of people who will probably support the Rwanda legislation. However, what is to stop them, the government, when I say them, pass legislation that infringes on their rights later on? And this seems to be the precedent that's been set. If we don't like what you're saying, we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, it's the Leonard Muller thing of, I'm not sure if I got this first name right, but it's the principle of first they come for the asylum seekers, the refugees, then they'll gradually increase things. We see that with what happened with Shamima Begum. They used her as the test case. They always point their attacks on human rights against people that they think the public won't really get behind, because obviously people have mixed views on Shamima Begum, and they made it easier for them to take away the citizenship of British citizens, and now they can do it to any of us that have the ability to, people like me who have Nigerian parents.
So would you fear someday maybe your British citizenship being taken away from you?
Well, I mean, the test is, are you conducive to the public good? Do they think you're bad for the country? And that's for the government to decide. And I don't think right now the Tories would think people like us are good for the country.
Yeah, well, I don't have any other citizenship, Rishi, just to let you know. According to the Refugee Council, 93,296 people made applications for asylum in the UK, which relates to 75,430 applications. The Rwanda deal says that only 200 refugees can be taken at a time. So we can clearly see that this is not a viable solution to deal with small boat crossings. So why is this deal actually being pushed for?
See, the thing is, you say it's not a viable solution in terms of we can't send all the asylum seekers there, but that makes it not a viable threat. The whole point of this was, if you come to the UK, we'll send you to Rwanda. But you literally can't do that with the numbers that are coming over. So it doesn't even work on its own merits. So especially as we're going to be hearing that the part of the deal is that Rwanda will be able to send some of its refugees to us as well, which means that we might end up getting people going to Rwanda specifically so they can come to the UK. Yeah. It's a really weird one.
It is a very peculiar situation that basically that there's so much sort of determination to get this passed. And I suppose this kind of draws parallels with Brexit. You know, we have this it feels like a spin-off where there are MPs who are so tightly aligned to this deal, trying to get this done, to the extent that they will do whatever it takes, to the point where they will ignore what the courts are saying in order to get it passed. Why do you think that is?
So, as you say, they've staked their names to this concept, and it's well, for starters, they've got nothing left. Like the state of the country in terms of the cost of living, the economy, it's all just people suffering. So all they've got left is, yeah, I know we've made you poorer, but you guys still hate refugees, you still hate foreigners, right? And the question is, how many times are they going to do this? How many times are they going to deliberately hurt the country, but say, but don't worry, we're sticking it to Johnny Foreigner? They did it with Brexit. We saw 90% drop in nursing applications from the EU, and then we went into a pandemic where the experts say Brexit damaged our NHS. So that desire to hurt immigrants ended up hurting us. We're seeing it with this Rwanda bill. We know that it's costing, what is it, 100.
Yeah, so they found it, 169 grand per person. It would actually be cheaper to hire them their own caseworker, which would cost 30 grand, cover their rent, 18 grand, send 2 of their kids to school, £15,000, I assume that's private school most likely, feed, clothe them and their family for a year would be roughly around 10 grand, which the person has put isn't generous. So, but crucially, it wouldn't be cruel to do those things. So it is clear that it is performative cruelty to do this to some of the most vulnerable people on the planet.
Exactly. And imagine telling somebody who, because their target audience is working class people who see the idea of, some working class people who see the idea of there not being that much to go around, and so the idea of an influx of people means that their situation gets even worse. They're telling those people who are most desperate in the country, hey, instead of spending £169,000 to help you out, we're spending that money to screw Johnny foreigners. So it's always a case of them hating foreigners more than they love British people.
And I mean, we can look at the Rwanda costs here. So Rwanda costs 120 million plus 20 million pounds plus another 100 million that's been paid plus 50 million also agreed. That sounds like a Chelsea transfer. 290 million altogether, plus 2 more payments which have been undisclosed, but it's estimated to be around basically 2 payments of 50 million. So 100 million altogether. This is to send 200 people. This seems a bit excessive, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's an advertising campaign for the Tory party. That's what it is. You have to see it as what it is, which is a PR campaign. It's not about the politics. It's just about saying, hey, I know we've screwed you, but we still hate foreigners.
But so, I mean, let's look at how some MPs are voting. I mean, as we speak at the moment, guys, MPs are currently debating this in Parliament. So by the time this releases, we will know the verdict. Femi, do you want to try and guess the verdict?
I'm guessing it's going to be something along the lines of, well, I think it's going to lose by 100.
Lose by 100?
Yeah.
You think, and this will be, how big in terms of a government defeat would this be?
Would that be, no, it can't be worse than Theresa May's Brexit deal, can it?
I don't, could anything get worse than that? I feel like I'm on her. I feel like Ian Hislop saying that. The face. But let's, I mean, so it's been reported that the so-called moderate One Nation Tory group have announced that they will be voting or have voted in favour of the Rwanda deal. Does this sort of defeat the belief of, like, you know, a moderate Tory?
Yeah, well, the moderate Tory, that died a long time ago. That died when that died when Boris Johnson kicked out every single Tory MP that blocked a no-deal Brexit. That was literally saying, you won't be in this party if you're not okay with trashing the country. And since then, we've seen things like you remember when Owen Paterson did the biggest lobbying scandal we've seen, took £122,000 from pharmaceutical companies in order to push lobby MPs, and so the majority of Tory MPs then voted to change the rules so he could get away with what is essentially bribery.
It's corrupt, yeah, it's corruption pure and simple.
Exactly. So the notion of a good Tory and they're just doing their best, they have different ideas as to what will help people in terms of tax and spend, nah, that's gone.
Yeah, I mean, I remember once, actually, I think it was the other week, I shared a taxi home with a civil servant by complete accident, and I was sort of mentioning various sort of Conservative MPs, and he said, you know, having worked, he'd worked in the civil service for, I think, since 2008, and he said, you know, I genuinely believe that, you know, all of these MPs go into politics thinking that they are doing good and that they have the right ideas, and I think austerity, 330,000 people losing their lives. And this is what's interesting. A lot of the people that are seen as like being moderate Tories all supported austerity. Rory Stewart's perhaps the prime example of that. And I know that he sort of justified that along the line, saying, well, you know, my constituents voted for a Conservative manifesto. But did they vote to basically destabilise the country in the form of austerity?
So, like, even austerity, I understand. I can look into their minds and say, all right, maybe they genuinely believed that the best way to help people was by avoiding spending too much money, and that is their ideology. But at least at their core, they thought that was the right way to go. At least some of them did. Obviously, we've seen that most of them are psychopaths. But sorry,
No, you can say, I mean, yeah, you can say that. I mean, I don't. If any of them want to come on and defend their stance, you're more than welcome to come on. Our DMs are open. DM me.
But clearly a lot of them genuinely don't care. But I can understand the concept of, if you're conservative for tax reasons or whatever, I can have a rational debate with you. We might disagree on how you help people, but I can understand that you're another human being. The people we've got now are not that. They deliberately hurt people. They know that spending this money is not going to help people who are in the most desperate situations we've seen for generations. We know that this is the sharpest fall in living standards ever recorded, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility.
Yeah, the OBR. Yeah, they've reported it's the lowest living standards on record since the 1950s. There's another report that came out a few days ago that said that we are sort of slipping into sort of Victorian levels of inequality in this country.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg here is kicking his feet in the air.
So to be spending £169,000 per refugee to send people to a place that won't actually work as a scheme because they're only going to take 200 people, when people are that desperate, you don't give a shit about ordinary people. You just don't.
So, I mean, obviously, for a lot of people, migration is a big issue. Why do you think that is?
It's what I was saying before. If you are living in extreme poverty, the notion of having to share the wealth is going to feel like a threat. However, it's just a matter of just if you saw the contribution that people from other countries make, if you saw the fact that we have an incredibly aging population, therefore we desperately need more young people coming into the country in order to support our aging population, then things change. So that natural inclination of the default would be, I haven't got anything, I don't want to share. But that gets corrected when you actually look at the facts of things.
So what are the facts of things?
The facts of things is citizens from other countries, because they tend to come here to work, statistically contribute more to the in tax to the economy than they take out. The fact is that people from other countries are more likely to work in our NHS and therefore be there to look after you than people who are born here. The fact is that immigration is a net benefit to people in this country. We need immigration in order to function. Our economy is crying out because of the massive labor shortages. And I think a lot of the great things about the UK came from immigration.
What's the best thing in what respect?
I'm now thinking of the Rowan Atkinson sketch.
Look, I like curry, but now that we've got the recipe, yeah. No, there are some people who unironically say that.
Yeah, no.
I guess I am going to push you on that. What's the best thing that immigration has contributed to the UK?
Me?
You? Yeah. I don't know. There might be some people. There's going to be people seething at that.
I know.
Yeah. You're not helping anyone like the whole ego thing.
I know, right? No. Best thing immigration. I think objectively, because of the benefit that it does to the NHS, it saves lives. So if you like with the EU situation, I know the figures were 5% of the UK population is from an EU country, but 10% of our doctors are from an EU country. That means it's objectively helping save more lives. And given that we've been through a pandemic where our main choke point was a lack of NHS staff, immigration propping up the NHS has to be the best thing, just in terms of life saving.
Well, let's look at the NHS, and looking in the context of the Rwanda deal, they're saying it's costing 390 million. But surely that money would be better off in the NHS. Why don't the Tories put the money there?
Because our government doesn't give a shit about the NHS. It is that simple. They would much rather risk the lives of asylum seekers than save the lives of Brits. We know that in 2018, Rwandan authorities shot dead 11 refugees because they were rioting about not getting enough food. And that's one of the reasons why the Supreme Court declared it unsafe. And instead of spending the money propping up the NHS, getting more doctors and nurses in, training doctors and nurses, improving education, pushing people into medical degrees, they're spending that money sending them to a country that our top court says is unsafe.
So in terms of dealing with migration, people clearly see it as a big issue and clearly as a vote winner. We've seen Labour's response to the Rwanda deal. to me, looking at it, it seems to come from the sort of perspective of this is costing so much money and nobody's gone over. And you think this is a political party that is led by a human rights lawyer. Surely your main concern should be the human rights, which the Supreme Court cited the Tories' own report into the country in 2021, saying that this is a country that has issues with human rights. Why doesn't Labour just say, look, there is a human element to this, and it is not being addressed?
Why would the leader of the Labour Party say that Israel has a right to deprive Gaza of electricity, water, and power? Because they're so scared of the right-wing press that they're willing to endorse the most inhumane policies that our country has ever seen. And so, yeah, we desperately need Labour to fundamentally change. Otherwise, it's going to be more of the same over the next 5-10 years. I
mean, they have said that they are going to be voting against it, and a lot of MPs have sort of come out and said that they don't support it mainly for humanitarian reasons. I guess, but again, dealing with migration, and I don't really like using that term, but clearly people do see it as a big issue. How would you deal with migration in this country?
In terms of the asylum process, the main thing is speeding up the process so that we don't take 1 to 3 years, which is how long it takes under the according to the Refugee Council, compared to France and Germany, which takes around 7 months on average, which ends up with us having to put asylum seekers into barges and temporary accommodation in hotels. We saw today the news of the asylum seeker who apparently committed suicide. That's the sort of conditions that we're leaving them in, not to mention the fact that they found Legionella's bacteria on one of the places. This is not how you treat people who come here asking for help. So for starters, help speed that process along, employ the people to make that process go faster, and then you'll actually get those people into our economy, which, as I said, is crying out for more people to work in it. We desperately need more people. As far as immigration in general, what we need to do is make sure that working class people do not in any way perceive immigration to be a threat. Because if we do have a capitalist system that allows employers to exploit people on low wages, then the greater the pool that those employers can draw from, the more they'll be able to exploit. They'll say, well, if you're willing to work for 3p, I'll employ that person, and that pushes wages down. However, if we strengthen unions, if we empower unions to actually make sure that people are not exploited, then the standard wage in the UK will be better, and the more people we get will not affect wages at all, and we will just get the benefits.
So Rishi Sunak put out saying, I'm blocking the reasons used to prevent flights to Rwanda from being taken off. This emergency law is the only way to... I'll start again. So Rishi Sunak said, I'm blocking the reasons used to prevent flights to Rwanda from taking off. This emergency law is the only way to make Rwanda work and control our borders. This is from his official Twitter account. And they've basically put reasons how illegal migrants try and stay, claiming asylum, blocked, abuse of modern slavery rules, that's quite concerning, blocked. Claims that Rwanda isn't safe, blocked. The risk of being sent on to another country, blocked. Spurious human rights claims, blocked. This is dangerous stuff to be legislating against. I mean, particularly that middle point, claims that Rwanda isn't safe, a country that the government proved in 2021 wasn't safe. I mean, this must be frightening.
Yeah, this was always the direction that this government was going to head. When I started fighting Brexit, I was working in Brussels, working with a human rights organization, pushing back against things like our sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia, which were being used to bomb hospitals and schools in Yemen. I was pushing back against the fact that we train Bahraini police officers here in Sandhurst, and then they go back to Bahrain and torture human rights offenders. That's the kind of stuff that the Tories were always trying to do. It's the reason why they've always hated the Human Rights Act, and they want to get rid of it. And this is what they were always going to do now that they're fulfilling the will of the people. And so this utter disregard for human rights, for international norms, is what you would expect from that kind of government, especially as when you think about the context of international human rights law, most of it stems from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, which was essentially the international community saying, given what happened in the Second World War, we probably should make sure that countries don't just set their own human rights law and treat especially people they deem to be others properly. So for a prime minister to say, to hell with international rights law, any claims to international rights law cannot be used to protect you, you are just announcing to the world that you are a rogue state.
I mean, it's concerning, isn't it? What do you think is going to happen next? Because let's say, hypothetically, this legislation gets voted down, doesn't go through. Where do the Tories go from here?
Well, so in terms of international human rights law, international law in general, the rule the courts tend to follow is we will assume that anything we do, any law the government passes is compatible with human rights law unless they explicitly say that it's not that to basically to overrule human rights international law. So because they've now done that, the court's hands will be tied, and so they'll have to interpret it in line with whatever Rishi Sunak says. That means that it will be for foreign courts to essentially to then get involved, and that's the irony of it. They've now forced foreign courts to be the only way that we can protect human rights in the UK. So we will see a degree of backlash when cases are brought before the European Court of Human Rights, and there will be lots and lots of pushback and legal challenges in the UK.
So, I mean, obviously, and the European Court of Human Rights is something that the Tories have sort of, at least members of the Conservative Party have said that they want to leave because of issues with dealing with migration. That feels, again, like with Rwanda, it feels like again, sort of like a sort of Brexit spin-off, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, we're tying ourselves to this cause, and we're not going to untie ourselves until it's been achieved. Again, I know I keep saying this, but this is very concerning that we want. And also, I think what people forget is that Winston Churchill helped set this up, seen as one of Britain's greatest heroes, which of course is up for debate for another time. Maybe we'll have that debate someday. But, I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
So leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, leaving essentially the Council of Europe, which the only other country in Europe that's done that, I believe, is Russia. Does not put us in great company. But as you said, this stems from a sort of Brexity. We will not be. We want British sovereignty means we don't let foreigners decide our laws here in the UK, and they simply can't be trusted. Like, there are issues to sort out in terms of the boats crossing the channel, obviously. But as with all these things, yes, the issue needs to be dealt with, but these aren't the people to do it because we know they don't care. That's the main thing.
It was reported that Rishi Sunak said to Tory MPs in a meeting, "Unite or die." Which do you think they should do?
You're trying to get me on a list.
Your career is in my hands right now.
You're trying to get me on a list now. Okay.
I just want to say when they say this terms like unite or die in terms of like as a political force, in terms of they will die out, not as in like, you know, someone's going to go around and nank them. I should stress that very heavily.
Of course.
I'm editing that bit out. I'm going to get you. This is in my hands.
So I that was a Thor reference. Did you guys get it?
No, I didn't. But carry on.
Never mind. Oh,
yeah, I want an answer.
So I think they should unite and single file into prison.
Okay, all right, we'll take that answer. Femi, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure again. What have you got? Any closing remarks?
That we need to push back against this, and that involves basically whipping Labour into shape. So the reason why Labour feels that they can take advantage of the progressive majority within the UK is because they think that we don't have any other choices. And the reason they feel we don't have any other choices is because of the voting system. So if you care about fixing this and actually holding politicians' feet to the fire and making sure we actually have a viable alternative to the Tories, first past the post has to go. You need to be making the argument to everybody around you that the UK is not a functioning democracy.
And to all of you listening, please remember that the way that a government treats refugees is a damning indictment of how they would treat the rest of us if they thought that they could get away with it. Thank you for listening.